Hi everyone, my name is Julie. This is Keep Calm with Books and Coffee. I talk about books on this channel, mainly books about magic, and if you want to see more of that, you can hit the subscribe button down below. And today we are going to be wrapping up my June reading, and it's going to be a doozy. Hello everyone. So as I told you in my May wrap up, I filmed this once and it didn't go well. In fact, the footage it like ate itself. I don't really know what happened, but we have a lot of books to talk about for June. So we're gonna jump right into it. I ended up reading more than 40 things in the month of June for Tar. There's a few I can't talk about because they are for future projects, but we are gonna do our best to cover everything as succinctly and quickly as possible. So the very first thing I finished in June was something I couldn't even count for Amazing Readathon, and it was to finish up my read of Sunbringer by Hannah Canner. This is the second book in the Fallen Gods trilogy. In the first book, God Killer, we are following 4 different characters. We are following Kissen, who is a god killer. She is contracted to go out and kill gods because they are illegal in the kingdom she lives in. They were part of the God Wars, and ever since then, god killers go out and destroy them. We also have Elagast, who is a disgraced knight who is on a mission from the king, and we have Skedi and Inara. Inara is a young noble girl who has Skedi, the god of white lies, attached to her, and they cannot be separated or they are both in great pain. So we are going on an adventure to figure out why Inara and Skedi are attached, while Kissen doesn't want to help a god, but she wants to help the girl, and Elagast is kind of also in this group of characters. In the second book, we pick up right where we left off in the first book, and we go on an even wider adventure. It's so interesting. I absolutely love the way Canner expanded this world and expanded what we were getting at and what the things we were tackling. I also just loved how I really wasn't sure where we were going to go at the end of the first book, and we just like blossomed the world and learned so much more about what was going on in the larger picture amongst what was already happening with our characters. I loved this book. I really don't think this had second book syndrome, at least in my opinion. I just had I had like an even better time with this second book, which doesn't always happen. I was even more emotionally invested and vulnerable for this one, and I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. Can't wait to see what we get up to in the third and I believe final book. Next up was The Heartless Prince by Angela DeVito, and this was a graphic novel that I've had my eye on for a couple of years because I follow the artist on Instagram, and she had put out this graphic novel as her debut a little while ago. In this, we're following a prince who is neighbors with a kingdom that has been destroyed by witches, and they took in the young princess from that kingdom when they were both very small. So prince and princess have grown up together, and now witches are trying to enter this kingdom, and this is the story of what happens when the prince gets captured outside of the wards around his kingdom. I thought this was a really good first debut graphic novel. The art was the predominant part of the story, but I think that is to be expected when the artist is an artist more than a writer necessarily. The story structure was fine, but it was pretty simple, and I enjoyed the art style a lot more than I did necessarily the plot. But this was beautiful. I would definitely read more or explore more in this series, and just enjoyed it, but it was simple. Then I read Roleplaying by Cathy Yardley, and this we're following 2 characters. The first is Maggie, who is a middle-aged mom whose son has just gone off to college. She joins an online game playing group to kind of keep herself busy, and she believes she is much older. She believes she's playing with like college players while she's in her like mid-40s, and one of the group's like leaders, Aiden, believes that she is an octogenarian, like she's 80 years old, because she keeps telling them all she could be their grandmothers because she thinks they're in their 20s. Meanwhile, Aiden is in his mid-50s and helping caring for his mom. They actually live in the same town, and eventually they figure that out and meet up and are shocked to find they are the same age, and after that some romance ensues. I really liked this book. It was just an excellent pretty short, like it's just over 300 pages romance, and I had such a fun time reading it. It has some really great one-liners in here. I also really loved how the characters were complicated and had complicated backstories and things that were going on in their lives that they had to solve beyond just this romance. I really liked how the characters communicated with one another and just how funny this book was and how often I was laughing at it. Just an excellent read, and I'm so glad I picked it up because it was a host favorite from Heather for the Amazing Readathon. I also finished Every Time You Hear That Song by Jenna Voris. This is the story of another dual timeline book where we follow a past and a present timeline. In the past, we're following Deckley Castle, who is a Dolly Parton-esque figure in country music. She is kind of up and rising through the 60s and 70s in country music and becoming more and more popular, and she's also working with McKinley Harper, who is her songwriter, and this is the story of why the two of them stopped writing songs together. Then we're following Darren and Kendall in the present timeline after Deckley Castle passes away, and they are supposed to open a time capsule at her funeral, but when they open the time capsule, it is actually a scavenger hunt. So Darren wants to get out of her small town desperately, so she and Kendall go on this scavenger hunt to try and figure out where it is and everything, and Darren knows Deckley really, really well, so they are trying to get on the right track. And it's Darren's story too of self-discovery and what's going on and appreciation for the people in her life, and I absolutely love this. It really got me in the feelings a few times. I loved all the characters, even the ones I think I wasn't supposed to like quite be enamored with, but that happened a few times this month. You'll see that again when we get to Delilah Green Doesn't Care. But I just really loved all the characters in here and had a great time reading it. If you like Taylor Swift, Dolly Parton, Evelyn Hugo, I think there's another country music maybe, just, you know, all those things blended together, it really felt like that kind of book, and it was all of my favorite things jam-packed together. Then I read Imakoi, Now I'm in Love, volumes 1 through 9 throughout this month. I read the whole series. This is the story of two high school students, Satomi, who blurts out her feelings when another student saves her on the train, and the two of them start dating, and she and he need to figure out their relationship and what works and what doesn't. It's like kind of classic finding out how a relationship works in high school type of story. It's cute, it's sweet, it was easy to read, and I just could keep devouring these throughout the month because of Face Off weekend and needing to do sightseeing and stuff like that, so I got through these pretty quickly. I reread Sweep of the Heart by Ilona Andrews. This is the 5th book in the Innkeeper Chronicles series, and I reread this both because I wanted to and also because the graphic audio was out now and I could listen to it that way, which I listened to like the regular audiobook before when it first came out. So I wanted to try out the graphic audio, and it was excellent. All of these on graphic audio are really good in my opinion, and they're very like comfort reads to me at this point. In this series, we're following Dina, who is an innkeeper on Earth. Earth is a waypoint for a international galactic travel, but no one knows on Earth that aliens come and stay at these very specialized inns, so that is part of Dina's job to keep the kind of visitors a secret. In this 5th book, we start to really look at the larger picture with Dina rather than just the individual instances at her inn, and sort of what's going on in the background and what is possibly happening, and maybe what happened to her parents, which is a question she's always had. And I'm just really excited to get to our next book. This one made me cry a few times. There's a bachelor element to this, which isn't necessarily my favorite, but I still really enjoy this book. I also read Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the 1st book in the Bright Falls trilogy. In this, we are following Delilah Green, who is a young woman who ran away to New York City after leaving her hometown of Bright Falls on the West Coast because she didn't get along with her step family, and now she's going back for her stepsister's wedding. And while she's there, she runs into her sister's one of her sister's bridesmaids, Claire, who the two of them hit it off and have an attraction. Claire is trying to figure out her life and being a single mom and balancing things with her ex and everything, and the two of them kind of have to go from there. I liked this. I don't think I liked this quite as much as some other people. There was a few things that happened at the beginning that I just didn't put me off on the wrong foot with the characters. Some of their attitudes about things frustrated me, so I didn't necessarily love them right from the start. They had to win me over, and they did to some degree. I did like finish the book. I had a good time, but I think I'm gonna sit middle of the road with this. When I said that other characters won me over, Astrid won me over in this book, so I'm interested to try her book because a lot of people said they weren't interested in trying Astrid's book because of her personality in this book, but she won me over just as much as the others did. So I'm interested to see where we go from here. But yeah, this is gonna end up at like a 3.5 for me. I enjoyed it, but I also had some issues with it. Then I tried Cat Plus Gamer volumes 1 to 4. These are the 4 that are translated into English right now, and I really enjoyed these. This is the story of a young woman who she does her job, she goes home, and she gets all of her work done so she can play the most amount of video games in her evening as possible, but then she adopts a cat. And the cat kind of messes with her time in playing video games, but she also treats the cat as a video game in that she's learning and leveling up in her ability to care for the cat. It's really sweet, it's really cute. I had a great time reading it. The cat does silly and funny things. She does silly and funny things throughout the story, and I've just really enjoyed these, and they're a lot of fun. I also finished up my read-through of the Kinsman universe by Ilona Andrews this month by reading the 3rd and final book, Fated Blades. In this, we are following a sci-fi world where we have major corporations who are developing technology to enhance human bodies, and the 2 leading companies are headed by these 2 families who do not get along. But the heads of the family, their spouses run away with one another, so they team up to try to keep this espionage a secret and also recover the data that they need, and a little bit of romance sparks along the way. I found this series extremely interesting to read because it really felt like we were exploring things like if you had mashed certain Ilona Andrews series up together, what you would get. Like, this felt very much like an On the Edge series matched up with the Nevada Baylor series. Like, if you matched them up together, what would you get? You kind of got something like this. I really liked how the Andrews have a lot of similar elements in their stories, and then they kind of explore them differently in each book. So this was interesting. It wasn't my favorite. It was actually really short, but I had a fine time with it. I wouldn't necessarily need more of this like shorty version of this world because I want to sink my teeth deeper in it, and every time I start to feel like we are finally getting to like understanding the world, we are done. So not necessarily for this universe do I want more short fiction from them, but I would be interested to see a longer book in this universe. So I doubt that's ever going to happen, but a girl can want it. Then we have Demon in the Woods graphic novel Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo. This is like a prequel to the Grishaverse trilogy series. This happens before Shadow and Bone. We're following the boy that the Darkling starts out as and kind of seeing where he started out in the world and what happened to him. And this is just one very specific instance, so I felt like it was a little disjointed from everything. Like, I didn't really understand why we had this one instance. It was interesting, but also it didn't tell me anything more about the Darkling than what I had already kind of understood from the Shadow and Bone books. So this was okay, but it really didn't give me a lot. Then we started to get into the Spy Family volumes that I read this month. I read volumes 5 to 10, and I really can't tell you that much about them individually. In this, we're following a spy, an assassin, and a telepathic girl as the 3 of them pretend to be a family in order to solve the spy's mission. It's a really interesting little story, and I have had a good time reading it. It is a little bit off the wall and a little bit to silly levels at times, but I just really enjoy it and have a good time with it. Like I said, I can't really distinguish the individual volumes at this point because I did read a bunch of them. A little bit the same with Imakoi. I wouldn't be able to like pick out where specific things happened because I was reading them so close together, but I had a really good time continuing to read this, and I think I only have one more volume until I'm caught up. So we shall see where we go from there. I did start the anime. I'm about 3 episodes into that, and I'm really enjoying that as well. So I'm going to keep going with this and just hope more is on the way. I also reread A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers this month. In this, we're following sibling Dex, who is a tea monk. They left the city in order to become a tea monk, which is someone who travels around and offers tea as well as a listening ear to different villages in the area. But they are still a little bit unsettled, so they go off to kind of explore and go deeper and try and find crickets is what their sort of leading mission is. And what they come across is Mosscap, who is a robot after robots had left human society years ago. No human has seen a robot in years and years, so Dex and Mosscap interact and go on a little adventure together to figure out what they're gonna do. This is very sweet, heartwarming. I think years ago, a couple of years ago, this was like hope punk sci-fi, if I remember correctly. It's very sweet and wonderful. It's a little bit of a cozy sci-fi, like we have cozy fantasy, and I just really love this. I need to read the sequel. I haven't read the sequel yet, but this was a reread for me, and now I really want to dive into that. I also read The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. This is the same author of the Tea Dragon Society series, and I love that series so much. This really felt like it had similar themes to me in this. We're following a young person as they are becoming the Moth Keeper, but it's a bit of a lonely job because they have to take the moths out into the desert each night and then bring them back to safety as well. And I just thought this was a beautiful little story about like finding your place and exploring things and learning and growing up. The art style was beautiful, and I will always seek out more from Kay O'Neill just because their art is so pretty and soft and inclusive. I also read Truly Madly Deeply by Alexandria Bellefleur this month. This was one I was really anticipating coming out. In this, we're following Truly and Colin. Truly is a romance writer and Colin is a divorce attorney, and the two of them end up on a podcast trying to give romance advice to the listeners, but they get off on the wrong foot and then have to kind of reintroduce themselves. And I would say this is, I don't want to call it an enemies to lovers trope. That's not quite what it is. Instead, we're just seeing two people get off on the wrong foot, but then try to understand how that happened. And it's a lovely book. I really had a good time reading it. I loved the discussions that we had on page 4, bisexuality and bi-erasure. I also just really loved Colin as a character. Truly, I had a little bit harder of a time with just because she was a little bit more immature, and some of her actions were like nonsensical to me, but I still liked her overall. This book survived. I had such a good time reading it. I flew through it. Loved it, loved the characters, and I went to book club. My local indie had a book club for this book, and a few people tore it apart, and my love for the and enjoyment of it just overcame that, and it's still like a 5-star for me. I see where they're coming from with their points, but my experience was not quite what theirs was, and I can see why people would still have issues with this book, but I just really loved it and can't wait to read more from her. I reread Magic Bleeds by Ilona Andrews this month. This is the 4th book in the Kate Daniels series. Kate Daniels is a series where we follow Atlanta in the somewhat future where magic has re-entered the world. Basically, we get magic waves where magic works, and when the magic recedes, technology works, but they don't work at the same time. So humanity has had to adapt. Now there are vampires, shapeshifters, you know, you name it in mythology and they have it. And it is a really interesting series full of really interesting magic and problem solving, and Kate as the main character. The 4th book is one of my favorites. I think this is really when we start to get into the fun stuff of this series, and I had a great time rereading this. This was another one that I read because the graphic audio is now available, so I've been slowly making my way through the series on reread, listening to the graphic audios, and it's really, really fun. I also finished up This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This was another book that was a indie book club pick for me a few months ago, and I missed book club, and then I didn't have a deadline for this book, so it just kept getting pushed. And in this, we're following Soledad, whose husband is not only cheating on her, but embezzling from his company. And Judah Cross figures out what Soledad's husband is doing and turns him over to the police and the FBI. Soledad is left to kind of pick up the pieces with her 3 daughters, but her and Judah have an attraction, so the two of them have to kind of figure out this feelings that they're having while Soledad is trying to put her life back together and reconcile the fact that she's attracted to the man who put her husband in jail. So it's a really interesting story. I think we picked this for a romance book club, but I think it's more balanced between fiction and romance than a lot of romance I read, because there was a lot more in here about Soledad figuring out her life and how she was going to move forward and reconciling with things more than just the focus on the romance. For every 2 chapters we got of her, I think we got like 1 of Judah, and Judah is still figuring out stuff. He has 2 autistic sons and is divorced, and it's like single mom, single dad romance. There's a lot in here, and I loved how complex their stories were, but we did get a lot more of Soledad and her figuring things out than we did necessarily of her romance with Judah. Like, that was sort of a step down in it was Soledad's story, and then it was their story, and then it was Judah's story, I think, rather than it being balanced between the 2 of them and it all coming together. But I still liked it. And now I get to talk about the rest of the story by Tal Bauer. This is the story of Morgan, who is a hockey player in the NHL, and he is towards the end of his career when he gets traded to the Outlaws. And the Outlaws are a losing team. They hardly win any games any year. And when Morgan goes to the team, a friend of his kind of gives him the down low on the team and how Morgan ended up there, because they need help, because the team is in a really bad spot. Their captain is abusive, and they're all in a really bad situation, and Morgan comes in and he basically says, absolutely not, and we are going to fix this. And from day one he steps up and becomes the person who is going to make it right there. And the story goes from there. This story is heavy and full of really heart-wrenching moments, but it is also so full of heart and love and beauty, and the amount of things that I highlighted on my Kindle are more than I have ever highlighted in a book before. I can't wait to reread this and physically go through and mark it up. I just loved Morgan. I loved the romance in here. I loved the team. I loved the found family aspects. I loved how we built this team back up and showed their like recovery and their setbacks as well as their triumphs and wins. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. I cried several times during this, and it's going to be one of my top books of the year. It was just absolutely fantastic. I also finished The Witchwood Knot by Olivia Atwater this month. This is the first book in a new series by her, which is called The Victorian Fairy Tales, and this is set in the same world as Half a Soul. And I'm a little bit conflicted on if I should have read Half a Soul first. I'm not quite sure. I got this as an ARC from NetGalley and read it later. Like, this came out last fall, I think, and I only read it now. But in this, we're following Winnie, who is a magic worker who all the fairies are gone from England, and she is going to this house to help protect the young boy that lives there. And she's sort of doing this out of obligation to the grandmother that lives in the house, and she's trying to figure out the mystery of this house, because it seems like this house might be the center of why there are no fairies in England, but I felt like this was sort of a plot that was all over the place, and I feel like I maybe needed more context to it, and I'm not sure if I would have gotten that from the Half the Soul series, but I'm just very curious about it because I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the character part of this story, but the plot was quite confusing, and the world building was not quite where I wanted it to be. So after loving Small Miracles as much as I did, this was a little bit of a disappointment. I also read The House Witch by Delmahawk, and this is the story of Finley, who he is a house witch and he can protect and shelter people and use his magic within his home, but that's as far as it goes. If he leaves his home, he's pretty much powerless. But he gets a new job working for the royal family in the castle as a cook and starts immediately making a safe space in the castle for people, as well as protecting people and cooking healthy food and trying to make the castle as healthy and happy as possible. And then we sort of get some conflicts around that. I liked this book. It was entirely too long in my opinion. It was cozy, but I just felt like we started going in circles and having a lot of the same conversations, and it was kind of frustrating to me. It just felt like it went on forever. And I also was a little frustrated with, throughout this book there are several instances where there's a lot of heavy drinking or a lot of heavy alcohol consumption, and there are several instances where this becomes like a problem, a chronic problem, and it's like never addressed as a problem. And I just was really bothered by that throughout this, how it just seemed to keep getting brushed aside and made a joke out of. So that was not my favorite part of this book. I don't know if I'll be continuing on with the series since it was so long, but I also found that very bothersome throughout the story. I also read Electric Idol by Katie Robert. This is the second book in the Dark Olympus series, and in this we are following Eros and Psyche. Eros is Aphrodite's son and the fixer for her. He like takes care of any problem for her, including murdering or making young women disappear who offend her, and Psyche has done that. She has offended Aphrodite. So once they realize there is a bit of an attraction between them, the two of them get fake married in order to protect Psyche. And does it work? We're going to find out. But this is forced proximity, pretend marriage, fake dating, all of those kind of tropes. I really liked this. I had a great time reading it. It was fast-paced and fun, and I really work better with Katie Roberts' novels than I do her short stories, so I had a great time with this. I really like this series, and I need to remember to go back to it sooner rather than later. Overall, this was just great, and I'm very curious how if the titles of the like 13 Olympic gods are assigned and change over time, how we've gotten Eros and Psyche here. Like, do they name their kids after the Greek gods, or does it all just work out? Maybe I'm thinking about it too hard, but I just had that thought while this was happening, while this book was happening, and I'm just curious about it, but that's a question for another day. I also read Your Guide to Not Getting Murdered in a Quaint English Village by Maureen Johnson. This was something I picked up because it was a buddy read in Leandra's Patreon, and this is so funny because it is kind of modeled after the old time like British crime shows and like everything you could encounter in a British village that, you know, would end up killing you in some way, shape, or form. I failed all the quizzes. I laughed my way through it. It was a really fun time, and I'm glad that Leandra put this up as the pick just because I wanted to be introduced to it, and I had a great chuckle about it. And then the last thing I read was Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This is the most recent Heartstopper release, and I believe the penultimate volume. So the next one will be our last, which is really sad, but I had a really good time reading this. This is such a sweet high school story of two boys who have to figure out if they're in love or not. They have to figure themselves out in many different aspects of their lives, but one of them is figuring out their relationship, and it's just so sweet and wholesome and wonderful, and this was like the perfect uplifting way to close out the amazing readathon. But that is everything that I read in the month of June. It was quite a bit. Thank you so much for hanging around and listening to me talk about them all. If you have any thoughts or feelings or want to share anything about the books that I talked about today, please let me know down below. And if you want to let me know you were here but you aren't feeling chatty, you can leave me a book stack emoji because this was quite a stack of things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!